Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Hey everyone, Craig Baird here. Before I begin today's story, I want to take a moment to ask you to check me out on Patreon. There are several tiers with great benefits, including ad-free episodes delivered early to patrons. You can also donate directly to the show at www.canadaehx.com through Buy Me a Coffee or through e-transfer at crwbaird@gmail.com. Donations help keep the show going. I've also released my first history book, Canada's Main Street, the epic story of the Trans-Canada Highway. You can find it in most bookstores in Canada and through online retailers. You can find the links for Patreon, donating, and my book in my show notes. Okay, let's get to the show. I still remember the way the cold bit at my cheeks as I stepped off the bus. I was in high school, and winter in Alberta meant darkness clinging to the morning and the crunch of snow under every boot. Our high school had organized a ski day, and most of us had been buzzing about it for weeks. I had never skied before, but couldn't wait to hit the slopes at Rabbit Hill Snow Resort south of Edmonton. Now, the hill isn't huge like the mountain resorts in British Columbia we see in brochures, but it felt big enough to us, and after figuring out the tow rope and the bunny hill, I thought I was good enough to hit more difficult runs. I rode up the lift, my legs dangling as it hummed overhead. From the top, I could see the North Saskatchewan River Valley stretching white and flat in the distance. Then I quickly practiced French fries and pizza with my skis. I looked down at the lodge 100 meters below me and fearlessly took off. The feeling of the wind in my hair was exhilarating. This was the 1990s, so helmets were pretty much optional. I thought I was pretty hot stuff on the ski hill. But then I hit a bad patch of snow and slammed face first into the ground. That night, my parents kept me awake and asked me random questions like, "What's the day of the week?" and "What's your name?" Thankfully, I didn't have a concussion, but it was the end of my skiing career. I'm not a thrill seeker on the hill. After all, I'm not a crazy Canuck. I'm Craig Baird. But today on Canadian History X, I am joined by one. He is one of Canada's greatest skiers. His name? Ken Reid. The story begins far from the spotlight and very far from the Alps. It begins on November 6, 1955 in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where Ken Reid was born, and skiing had been imprinted in his DNA. After all, Ken said his mother Dee had been the Canadian downhill and combined champion in 1948.
I don't really ever remember, a moment of epiphany or, that, no, this is really what I want to do. It was just part of the family history, and I'm third of four in our family, and everybody ski raced. We all knew my mother ski raced.
His father John was doing a postgraduate in pediatrics, and by the time Ken was 3, he was skiing down the hills outside the city on his first pair of skis, which were from Woodward's department store. The price of Ken's journey into Olympic history? A mere $5.95. In 1958, the family moved to Vancouver, where the North Shore Mountains stood like a promise on the horizon. His father became an assistant professor of public health and pediatrics at the University of British Columbia, and Ken was within driving distance with his family of places like Mount Seymour Ski Area, where the family went every weekend. After 4 years in Vancouver, John became the head of the Department of Preventative Medicine at Queen's University, and once again, the Reids packed up and moved. This time across the country, and far away from the big hills near the Rockies. In their new home, the family joined the Ottawa Ski Club at Camp Fortune. The club was the largest in the region and had been around for decades as the most popular choice for alpine racing and for producing Olympians.
At the time, Ottawa Ski Club was the largest ski club in Canada and had a stellar history of Anne Hegdeviet, and Betsy Clifford was one of the up-and-comers of the day. A little bit older than me, but you were always, and then there were others. Curry Chapman, it's one that comes to mind. That you knew them when they came home and skied around. You're always thrilled to have them nearby, and looking up to them because those are the heroes of the day.
Sharing the same slopes as people he looked up to helped make Camp Fortune a second home. For 5 years, he pushed the limits inspired by other skiers, but by 1967, his thrill-seeking came at a cost when he went over a homemade jump and broke his right leg in 2 places. A year later, the family was on the move again. This time, they settled in Calgary, and Ken wasted no time in joining the Lake Louise Ski Club in Banff National Park. And by now, he was obsessed with the sport and wanted to find a way to ski all year. And when the resorts closed from April to September, Ken just went up higher to the mountain glaciers to ski. But Ken knew that in Canada in the 1960s and early 1970s, alpine skiing wasn't exactly a guaranteed path to glory. The Europeans were the ones that dominated downhill racing, but one woman was carving out a spot for Canadians internationally, and today she's recognized as the nation's most decorated female skier of the 20th century.
Really the most influential person, of course, in Canadian skiing then and now was Nancy Green-Rain. Nancy, of course, she had her iconic results of the first 2 years of the World Cup when the World Cup first started. Overall champion, the only one that Canadian that's ever won the World Cup overall title. Her Olympic gold and silver. And then the Nancy Green League starting, and so she was always present, and she was following on the heels of the success that had been established with our women. So starting with Lucille Wheeler, and with us being in Cortina right now, of course, 1956 winning her bronze. The interesting thing is that she was double world champion in 1958, and if in this day and age we had a Canadian athlete win 2 gold medals at a world championships, the country would go gaga. And we kind of forget it that she only came third at the Olympics, and which was an important breakthrough, but still, that was her stature, followed by Anne Hegdeviet with her gold medal in 1960, and then Nancy. So we had this succession of females that were very successful, which taught all of us, men and women, that Canadians could be successful.
Seeing Canadians performing so well inspired Ken to keep pushing the limits, but again he took it too far in 1969 when he once again broke a leg during a training run. This wasn't going to keep him from the slopes because once he was healed, he was back on the skis pushing for better lines and better times, but his world was about to be rocked by a move across the pond. In 1972, Ken's father took a position with the World Health Organization, and that meant the whole family was moving once more, but this time to Switzerland.
It was a pivotal moment, many epiphanies through the course of that year. We live in an island of North America, and we are isolated. Alpine ski racing is a Eurocentric sport. Most of it takes place in the Alps. And they have a long, storied history in ski racing. We have the good fortune in Canada of being able to be a part of the history of our sport, but it's different. The mindset's different. I guess to start with, the best way to explain it is ski racing is to Switzerland and Austria what hockey is to Canada. That it's forefront. It's taken extremely seriously. It's their national sport. High levels of engagement, and what I saw in that is a couple of things. One being the talent pool is much deeper. So you're realizing instead of being it's somewhat trite to say it, but instead of being a big fish in a small pond, you're a small fish in a big pond, and you realize very quickly that okay, I got to step up the game. Number one, number two, there's lots to learn. Number three, it's a totally different culture. You have different languages. The familiarity, the slopes are tougher. The seriousness is at a much higher level. The intensity is deep.
By the early 1970s, Switzerland was already one of the most dominant forces in international alpine skiing. The country had hosted the 1972 Winter Olympics, and Swiss racers were household names. Ski heroes like Bernard Russi, who was an Olympic downhill champion that year, symbolized technical precision and controlled aggression. Swiss skiers were known for their smooth, efficient style compared to the more flamboyant Austrians, but for both countries, racing mattered deeply. World Cup events in places like Wengen and St. Moritz were more than a competition. They were a national showcase, a place where the two countries could battle for skiing supremacy.
The best way to explain it is the intensity you see in hockey in Canada is what is required in skiing. And it's not a recreational sport. It is a seriously followed, seriously engaged, and highly professional. And that's what you have to do. And so being exposed to all that was a tremendous experience.
The family returned to Canada in 1973, and by then Ken had a whole new perspective on skiing and his future within the sport. He wanted to make the national team. Ken had raced in Europe, and he sent those results to Scott Henderson, who was the head coach of the team.
Scotty was relatively fresh off the World Cup tour. He had many years of experience at the elite level, knew the work ethic required. He had had some success. He'd come close. He'd finished fourth in a slalom in World Cup. So, but at this point in time, no Canadian male has ever hit the podium. He'd come close, but nobody's hit the podium. I would add to that, Jim Hunter was the bridge, because we'd had successful people before that. Peter Duncan, Scotty Henderson, Jerry Rinaldi, a number of others that had come close, had kind of made their presence, but never had broken through. A lot of innovative things had been put in place, like glacier training and so on. So the base of the sport had lifted to being closer to where the Europeans were. But we still hadn't built the strong cohort. And cohorts are critical. And that was what Scotty was trying to do, was build a strong team.
Scott was impressed by this brash, fearless skier and invited him to a preliminary ski camp at Sunshine Village in Banff, and that led to a Can-Am team tryout in Rossland, British Columbia. The Canadian-American Racing Series had been founded during the 1970-71 ski season as a training ground for young racers, and the best racers would then be selected to the national team.
I can recall the Alpine director of the day when I came back, he sent a note saying you're going to be included with the Canadian training group, saying, obviously your year in Europe did you a lot of good. But the good was technically I had to develop significantly. I realized the work ethic that was required and had stepped up to that. And I had the exposure to the languages, to the locations, so that when I came back 2 years later, I was familiar with them all. And Steve Podborski actually was ahead of me when we made the Canadian team. And we reversed places. Our first year on the team, we competed in North America, and he was clearly ahead of me. The next year, on our first year in the World Cup, we reversed places. And where I came in as kind of the third of the three newcomers, I emerged at the end of the year as the first on the whole team. And I attribute that completely to that year of experience in Europe.
Ken joined a group of Canadian skiers that at best were considered plucky outsiders. But that was about to change. By the mid-1970s, Ken was part of a bold, fearless group of Canadian downhill racers who would come to be known collectively as the Crazy Canucks. You'll remember from my episode in February 2026 that they shocked the ski world by taking the toughest, iciest lines down the slopes in the hopes of making the best times, and Ken might have been the best of them.
We knew that working together, right from the very big get-go, the cohort was formed, and to be together, that we have to work together, push each other, work as a group. Lots of training camps, physical training camps, ski training camps, where we were brought together as a group.
On January 19th, 1975, all of that hard work began to pay off. Ken came in 9th in the combined at Kitzbühel, Austria, followed by 8th in the downhill 2 weeks later on February 2nd in Megève, France.
The moment of epiphany was actually my first World Cup race, Gary's first World Cup race in Val d'Isère, first race of the season, sitting watching Franz Klammer accept the wheel of cheese from the local farmers and the symbolic egg for the criterion to the Premier Neige in Val d'Isère, and saying, we can do that. If it all comes together, we need the right day, the right moment, consistent conditions, and we can do that. And through the year of that first year, racing with some disadvantages because we still had not leveled the playing field. We were skiing with inferior suits. We were having trouble getting some of the best ski equipment. I have a moment where I was riding up the lift with Giuliano Besson, who's one of the top Italian downhillers, and he leaned over to me and he said, "What are you using, your M's or your W's today?" Because we were both skiing on the same brand of skis. And I looked up at him and said, "I'm just using my race skis. I don't know what you're talking about." And we were getting a whole different set of equipment than what the top Europeans were getting. But through results, we opened the doors to the ski manufacturers who started to say, "Okay, no, these guys are legitimate." We earned our credentials.
The Canadians had been exposed to European racing and began to see results. In 1975, Ken won his first of 6 consecutive downhill Canadian Alpine Ski Championships.
We were having success. We moved into the World Cup. And in my first year on the World Cup tour, skiing from numbers that were back in the 50s, my results rate were between 8th and 30th. So every race, you were getting reinforcement of you're competitive in downhill. But the key moment then, I think, in terms of the goal setting for our group, because, we trained together, we lived together, we were a family. We spent a lot of time together. You go to South America for a month, you're there for 30 days and you're not going home. Same thing over in Europe. And back in that time, you didn't flip back and forth across the pond, nor did you have FaceTime to be able to talk to mom and dad for free. It was $10 a minute, and you wrote letters, and that, or I show my boys the telegrams that we received, and they were sort of going, they say, "Well, these are like emails." And I go, "Yeah, except it took 3 days to get to you." And then they kind of go, "And cost you $10. And they go, "Really?" But that's just what it was in that time frame, the 70s.
On December 7th, 1975, at Val d'Isère, France, Ken skied the first race of his sophomore season. His time was 2:04.97. As the first skier down the hill, he then had to wait for every other racer to come down and see if his time had been good enough. Skier after skier crossed the finish line, and Ken's time held, and by the end of the event, his time was the fastest. Ken was the first Canadian man to win a World Cup ski event, and it wasn't a fluke either. He did it on the back of aggressive, technical, fearless skiing. Not to be outdone, his fellow Crazy Canucks, Dave Irwin, Jungle Jim Hunter, Steve Podborski, and Dave Murray finished 4th, 9th, 10th, and 13th respectively. Ken's victory had shattered a psychological barrier. Canada was no longer just participating, Canada was winning. He was looking to repeat his previous feat a month later on January 9th, 1976 in Wengen, Switzerland. But it wasn't meant to be because Ken took a bad corner and didn't make it down the course. And while he was unharmed, his teammate Dave Irwin had a terrible fall and rolled into the protective netting. Ken went up to his friend expecting him to be okay, but instead saw blood everywhere. Irwin was starting to turn blue because he had suffered a severe concussion, several broken ribs, and facial cuts from his glasses shattering into him. His skis, helmet, and poles all destroyed. Today, the spot where Dave and Ken wiped out is called Canadian Corner. And at the time, the Canucks didn't have much time to dwell on the accident. They had their sights set on the Olympic Games. And all eyes would be on the Crazy Canucks in Innsbruck. In the downhill, Ken Reid took 5th place, only 0.4 seconds away from the podium. It was the best result for a Canadian on the downhill at the Olympics to that point.
The funny thing is in my recollection is because there were 5 of us, and there never, perhaps it was because the season started so strongly with me winning the first race, Dave winning the 3rd race, and we never, really never doubted that we'd of course be on the Olympic downhill. But there were 5 of us, and there's only 4 start spots. But then Steve solved that in that he had a crash in Kitzbühel 2 weeks before and blew his knee and was not able to participate. So it became very clear that it was going to be Dave, Jim, and Ken that were going to be racing in the Olympic downhill. The downhill is always the first major event of the game, still is, because they want to start it off with a bang. And in Innsbruck, it had heightened awareness because Franz Klammer is such a hero. He'd won every downhill the year before, and everyone was, so the focus was there. The crowds were there. There were 70,000 people. It was The context was good. It was a good, challenging downhill. We knew it was going to be a tough race. Big difference as well is we had 7 training runs. Now they have 2 or 3. It was so we actually started canceling training runs because we were having too much training on the track and we were overdoing it and people were crashing and getting hurt and so they backed off. But it was a heightened. It's often considered to be perhaps the greatest Olympic downhill because of the drama that unfolded of Bernard Russi coming down early, setting the time, person after person coming close to beating that, and Franz Klammer being number 15, which was the last reasonable number, to just barely beat him and win the gold medal, and 3 Canadians from the Canadian perspective finishing in the top 10, which was a remarkable result for us, but frustrating because we didn't go there to finish 5th, 7th, and 10th. I think it was. We went there to try to come home with a medal because we knew no Canadian male had ever won a medal, and so that was our mission. I would say in that year, Dave Irwin had a 6th place in the pre-Olympic downhill in Innsbruck. If the playing field had been level at that point in time, he would have won the race. 2 weeks later, I came 8th in Megève in the last downhill of the European season. And maybe the same would have been true, that we were that close the year before. It was the next year then where same thing. But so the ethic had been built, the cohort had been built, and that remained the core.
The Olympics may have been frustrating, but the Canadian team had the building blocks for excellence. It was just too bad that after a stellar ski season, the most difficult season of Ken's career was about to begin. From the beginning of the 76-77 season, something was off. Ken didn't finish anywhere near the top 20 in his first race or the next one. In fact, all of the Crazy Canucks failed to finish on the podium. The previous season, Ken had finished 9th in the rankings for the downhill at the end of the year. Now, he wasn't even in the top 20.
But we were all, I was only 21. I was 20. Nowadays, 20-year-olds are not even on the circuit. They're all older than that. It's Franzoni, Giuliano Franzoni is one of the youngest athletes on the tour right now, and I think he's 24. It was a bit of a blur that it went blasting by so fast, but always proud to represent your country. You're proud to represent your country and have a worthy result, but you're left slightly dissatisfied because your goal is to win. Yeah, the 76-77 season was a wake-up call that we weren't invincible, that we did have to work hard. It wasn't just arrive, oh, we're here, give us the laurels. And we also was a wake-up call in terms of how you prepare, that with equipment and preparation, that you had to be attentive to all the detail, which the Canadian approach had been just work hard and you'll be successful. Well, no, you've got to be smart too. And especially when you move from where you're trying to find seconds to trying to find hundredths, that's where you have to be at a granular level in every aspect of off the snow, on the snow, with your equipment, etc. That set us up then moving forward, so to rebuild out of that.
After the season, the team tried to figure out where to improve. Now, they thought at first it was the wax the Europeans used on their skis. In the end, through wind tunnel tests at the National Research Council in Ottawa, it was discovered the European suits gave them an advantage, a 15% advantage thanks to less wind resistance, in fact. The Europeans had put everything into figuring out how to beat the Canadians and had succeeded with better technology.
We recalibrated the coaching staff that supported us. The approach was changed. Steve was returning from a knee injury, so he was going step by step very deliberately through his return into snow and preparation. We did the same thing, was going back, re-examining all aspects of what we were doing and saying, okay, where are the gaps? How do we fill them? And what is the goal? Because the goal is to be back where we were, that we can be competitive with the best.
The next ski season was completely different for Ken. He kicked things off with a 4th-place finish in France on December 11, 1977, and a 9th-place finish at Cortina d'Ampezzo 11 days later. On February 11, 1978 at La Houche, France, he won the downhill event and was joined on the podium by his Canadian teammate Dave Murray, who finished second. This was followed by 2 more top 10 finishes to close out the season, and at the end of the year, Ken ranked 11th overall in the World Cup and 4th overall in the downhill. And for his heroics on the ski slopes, Ken earned the Lionel Conacher Award as Canada's Male Athlete of the Year and the Lou Marsh Trophy as the Canadian Athlete of the Year. He was the first skier since Nancy Greene in 1967 and 1968 to win the Lou Marsh Trophy. Ken never knew how much media coverage they were getting back in Canada, but winning the trophy changed that for him.
When you're over in Europe, you're laboring away and you're focused on what you're doing. The communication's not great. And you get word from home that, oh, yeah, you've been recognized. You go, oh, it's interesting. The good thing about recognition is in Europe, we were accepted. We'd show up at the venue, whether it was in France or whether it was in Austria, or Switzerland or Italy. And people would come up and say, well, we want you to beat those Austrians or we want you to beat those Swiss. But, we're cheering for our home team. But if they can't win, we want you guys to win, because you beat the other guys. So we were everybody's second favorite. And we realized very quickly that if you wanted to be able to communicate, you better learn German. So we all took that upon ourselves. Dave Murray took it upon himself to become fairly fluent in Italian. And that opened such the doors. And my favorite story is talking about the first time I actually did an interview in German. Was a race that I won, and I screwed up the courage. And I knew the Austrian television broadcast, the commentator, quite well, because I had been interviewed a couple of times. It was my third win. He asked the question in German. He repeated in English, and I went, okay, I'm going to take a stab at this, and I hope. And I know he won't have to translate what I say because I'm going to say it in German. I just hope he carries on with the same thing, asks the question in English and in German so that I make sure that I understand it correctly. And he did. But the look on his face was just priceless, of just astonishment and delight. And afterwards, he came running out of his commentator cabin, found me in the finish area and said, that was fantastic. That was just so special to be able to do that with you talking in German, because you can't believe how much impact that has to all of our viewers. It's so important. So thank you. And that, of course, reinforced it for all of us to continue to do that. And so that was what made us favorites in Europe. And our stuff, people, we let it hang out. We pushed the limits. We showed our enthusiasm, and people, of course, enjoy that. At the same time, we were separated from home, not realizing that the impact.
That impact was on the rise, as was his stock, because the next season was even better.
In every aspect of equipment, we all moved to one brand of ski. We got a new serviceman who was a European, and our goal was to convince him he was more Canadian than Austrian. And we had fun doing that, but that's you never can convince someone from another country to totally flip over. But we knew the sport, and I'll say that the tipping point where we realized that we were finally competing on a level playing field was actually the year following. It was the 78-79 season was the first time I truly felt that we were getting the same equipment, we were getting the same support. Still in the Canadian context, that it was never a flush program, but we knew how to be efficient, be smart. We had built we built a training alliance with the Norwegian ski team, who had Eric Hawker as a leading athlete and a bunch of young athletes, and that kind of fit with us. We maybe had a few more leading athletes, but we were all going to learn from Eric, because Eric was a top technical skier, but had gravitated to downhill. And they were wanting to build up a younger group, and they didn't have enough resources to do it by themselves. So we were two mutually compatible teams who worked together for the remainder of the time we were on the tour. And it worked famously. for both of us. Our results went up, and we learned a lot from each other. So it was being shrewd, good planning. We brought in Heinz Kappler as our downhill coach. John Ritchie took over the lead as the head coach. It was a good mix. Everybody did their job and realized that our strength was in working together, not working in silos.
He won at Schladming, Austria on December 10, 1978, and then came in third a week later at Val Gardena. A month after that, he had a third-place finish at Crans-Montana, Switzerland. But with the highs came the lows, when on January 6, 1979, Ken came in first and was followed by his teammate Steve Podborski in the downhill. Immediately after the race, the Italian team protested. They said Ken's ski suit gave him an advantage. There didn't seem to be anything unusual about his suit, and it was the same suit that the Swiss, the Austrians, and the Japanese were wearing. Regardless, the suit was tested, and when it failed to pass permeability tests, Ken was disqualified. However, Podborski remained in the competition and moved to the top of the podium in the downhill. Now, most felt that the suit did not give Ken an advantage, and that he deserved to win. Charlie Carr, the Austrian ski coach, said that Ken would have won the race wearing a business suit. The suit controversy also cost Ken 25 points in the World Cup standings, which caused him to finish fourth at the end of the season. Had he not been penalized, he would have been second. And despite the disappointment, the team and Ken in particular had a new goal in mind: Olympic gold. In the hyper-competitive world of alpine racing, the Canadians were now legitimate contenders on the sport's biggest stage. Heading into the 1980 Winter Olympics, Ken's form in the 1979-80 World Cup season was solid but not dominant. He continued to post top 10 finishes in downhill, demonstrating consistency and experience. And after placing 14th in France on January 6, 1980, Ken went on to win back-to-back races at Kitzbühel, Austria, and Wengen, Switzerland on January 12th and 18th. Expectations were high as he prepared for the 1980 Lake Placid Winter Olympic Games. Then, he received the highest honor for an athlete. Ken would be Canada's flag bearer for the opening ceremonies.
The one thing I do have to say is it's one of these things you have to be careful managing, because it happens the day before the downhill and it bumps you off your routine. And, it's easily done. I can, in retrospect, go there. There are a few things that I would have done differently. But would I have changed? No, because absolutely it's an honor to be recognized and to have that moment of pride where you're able to lead the team to the opening ceremonies and representing the country.
The 1980 Winter Olympics were already becoming one of the most dramatic winter games in history.
The Olympics have changed dramatically. Some cases for the better, in others, those of us, I think, who attended are a little nostalgic that it was a kinder, gentler time. We didn't have to deal with security. We didn't have to deal with all of the extra stuff that comes with the attention.
Most might remember it for the miracle on ice, but Ken would remember it for what happened on Whiteface Mountain at 120 kilometers per hour. The Olympic downhill was held on the upper slopes, a course that felt different from the classic European venues. It was steep, exposed, and weather sensitive, and training runs that week had been tense. For Ken, this wasn't foreign territory, but the pressure, that was immense. Canada was no longer a novelty act, and expectations now followed the Crazy Canucks. Ken was somehow a veteran on the team, even though he was in his 20s. He had already experienced Olympic heartbreak in 1976, and now he was at the top of the course on Valentine's Day, ready to leave it all on the line. But visibility was poor. There was a deep fog that made seeing anything almost impossible. Ken, he would have to trust his instincts and his years of training. Ken skied to the starting gate and stared down at the hill below. He heard the beep and burst out of the gate. But 15 seconds into his race, after only 3 turns, the left binding pre-released and Ken fell. His Olympic dream had been dashed, and in that moment, he thought of one of his heroes, Nancy Green-Rain.
When I had the misfortune in 1980 of my ski popping off in the 4th gate, when I stopped and was looking down at the snow with the reaction, you can actually see that I kind of I put my poles in the snow, just kind of tap them in the snow, and then look up and then look around for my ski. And what was going through my head was, remember, Nancy says everybody's watching, and your reaction is really important. And, so it was a piece of advice that was, important in terms of, we listened, we learned, we were inspired. And our legacy was that we finally established the male side, which was new. That was how we carved our own path from the legacy that the Golden Girls had established for Canada. It was a challenging circumstance to manage, but it would have been the same in any race, because you go into a race and your focus is on the outcome of that day, and you want to have a positive result, not no result. And in this case, it was it's once every 4 years, and everything had lined up for our team to be in a position to be successful, and then something that you never would have anticipated happened. But you understand that this is what happens in our sport. You don't like it, but it's part of the drama, and it's you have to then put it in context and move on.
The disappointment was personal, but possibly short-lived, because Ken then had a front-row view to Canadian history being made.
Steve, fortunately, who was right, he was the next athlete down the hill. I watched him go by and went on to win the bronze. So we delivered as a team. Steve did the job, and we broke the drought. Because no male had ever won a medal, and that was over. And now the goal is we've got to move past bronze, because we've got 3 bronzes now.
The Canadian Canucks had broken the barrier of what could be achieved. First, it was that a man could win a race in Europe, then that a man could reach the Olympic podium, and then they set a new goal, a World Cup title. Ken would get a chance at the new site 3 weeks later in Lake Louise, his hometown. But it wasn't meant to be. He came in a disappointing 8th, as some of the media unfairly claimed he had choked after the Olympics. And by the end of the 1979-80 season, Ken finished 11th, but 2nd overall in the downhill. It was his best result to date. Ken Reid and Steve Podborski celebrated by going to Europe, where they dined with the king and queen of Liechtenstein. Not a bad way to end a ski season. Ken was sure to quiet his naysayers at the first race of the 1980-81 World Cup season at Val d'Isère, France. On December 7th, 1980, he came in 2nd. Unfortunately, he didn't get much of a chance to silence his critics. About a month later, on January 10th, 1981, at Garmisch, Germany, Ken hit the final turn of the course just before the finish line when he caught an edge of soft snow. The crash severely injured the ligaments in his left knee. He suffered a broken nose, mild concussion, and 5 stitches above his eye. For the first time since he broke his leg 12 years earlier, Ken was out of commission due to injury. Ken's fellow Crazy Canuck, Steve Podborski, won the World Cup event, but before he went to the podium, he went to the ambulance to make sure his friend was okay. While some in the media wondered if Ken would be back for the 1981-82 season, there was never a doubt in Ken's mind that he would return. And he did on December 21st, 1981, with a 3rd place finish in Switzerland. He followed that with 2 more 3rd place finishes in Austria on January 15th and January 16th. Then he raced on home soil in Whistler on February 27th, 1982, where Ken was the first Canadian down the hill and finished 7th overall. Even with the injury, he finished 17th by the end of the season and 6th in downhill ranking. His friend, Steve Podborski, however, made history once again. He became the first Canadian to win the World Cup downhill title that season. The last goal of the Canucks that had been set for themselves had been achieved. As the 1982-83 World Cup season came around, Ken knew that his days in competition were numbered. Though he hadn't captured Olympic hardware or peaked at the World Cup, his presence on the team symbolized the maturity of Canadian alpine skiing. The groundwork they had laid in the mid-1970s had held. Canada was competitive on the world's fastest tracks, and they were no longer a novelty. Meanwhile, a new crop of Canadian skiers, inspired by the Crazy Canucks like Ken, were starting to move up the world rankings. Ken had a 2nd place and a 3rd place finish that season, and then in March 1983, he announced his retirement. Ken had competed in 83 World Cup races. He had 5 first-place wins and stood on the podium 11 times. And by then, the lore and legacy of what they had helped build had a lasting impact.
The Montreal Canadiens are the Habs. The Toronto Maple Leafs are the Leafs. Canadian skiers are Crazy Canucks. It's just it's a moniker. It's a label. But it's one that whenever you see it again and again and again. When a Canadian has success on the World Cup tour, immediately it's referred to, and it's not in context to us. It's referred to that the Canadians are back. The Canadians are playing a role. Because there's been so many since then, the Rob Boyds, the Felix Belchuks, the Kerry Mullins, the Eddie Podominskis, into the Eric Gays, the Manny Osborne Paradis. They tried to carve their own moniker with the Canadian Cowboys, but in part that was because I was their CEO at the time, and they wanted to distinguish themselves, and that's fine, so that's okay. But it never stuck. In Europe, they were always referred to as Crazy Canucks. And so through all this, it was, surprise, delight, seeing the style of how we skied, where we pushed the limits. Our view of it was we were just, we came in and we said, well, Franz Klammer's he's the gold standard. He's winning all the races. Emulate him, ski like him. Their explanation was, you can't ski like Franz Klammer. You're not Austrian. How does that matter? Well, and then when you had a series of crashes, Vin kind of reinforced that, which now it's called the Canadian Corner, where I fortunately I just basically lost my ski and went on my side and spun off the course. Dave exited spectacularly with a 360 and crashing and being taken off in a helicopter, and I had to carry his helmet and stuff down to the finish. That reinforced the kamikaze Canadians. And then I think it just became that the moniker of Crazy Canuck just became an easy thing because, kamikaze Canadians, you're doing a cultural crossover with that. Doesn't really describe it well. But, we'll always say, we all agree, is that initially it was an explanation as to why we emerged and why we kind of disappeared, Boom, great results in 75, 76, 76, 77. We're nowhere. There's nobody in the top 10 anymore. Oh, well, they were just a bit loony. They were crazy. And then working it back, and it became then a label of where it was always, revoilà, les Crazy Canucks sont là, was, a headline that I have from a newspaper, a Swiss newspaper or a French newspaper. So we were always referred to as that, and you realize, well, that's who we are.
After Ken retired from competition, he spent the next 14 years working with CBC TV as a ski analyst. He also launched the Breath of Life Ski Challenge, which raised $3.8 million for cystic fibrosis research. From 1985 to 1998, he sat as a member of the International Olympic Committee Athletes Commission. From 2002 to 2008, he was the president and CEO of Alpine Canada. The year that Ken took on the position, Canada had one podium result. By the 2006-07 ski season, Canada's alpine ski team had 15 podium results at the World Cup. In 2010, he was named the Director of Winter Sport for the Own the Podium movement, and under his leadership, Canada became one of the top winter sports nations in the world, and he resigned in 2013. He also helped to nurture 2 new skiers to Canada's alpine ski team. His sons Eric and Jeffrey both compete. There have been plenty of honours for him as well. He was inducted into Canada's Sports Hall of Fame in 1985, and 2 years later he was inducted into the Canadian Ski Hall of Fame. In 2002, he received the Order of Canada, and along with the rest of the Crazy Canucks, he has a star on Canada's Walk of Fame. And today, he can be found on the slopes outside his home in Calgary. But Ken's legacy goes beyond skiing. By the time he stepped away from elite competition, Canada was no longer an outsider in alpine downhill. Future generations would grow up expecting to contend, not hoping to survive. The Crazy Canucks changed the psychology of Canadian winter sport. They made speed a symbol of confidence. They made risk part of the national narrative. That's because Ken and the rest of the Canucks were bold enough to believe, and that ripples down to every Canadian racer who pushes out of the start gate. And that may be Ken Reid's most enduring victory of all. This show is researched, produced, and written by me, Craig Baird, with the help of Dila Velasquez. Audio production and design by Rosalind Kufor. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review to help other people find these amazing stories. And there are so many for you to sink your teeth into. If you enjoy this podcast, then please check out my other podcasts, From John to Justin, Canada, A Yearly Journey, Pucks and Cups, and Canada's Great War. We love hearing from you, so if you have a show topic you want me to cover, email me at craig@canadaehx.com. Or stop by my website and social media. I'll include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X.